If it were you, would you dare return to the place where your child vanished? The same place where you were once violated by something not of this world? Amar did. She went back. Before it was too late, because the truth no one wanted to believe is this. Her child, born from darkness, is the key. The key to a gateway between mankind and an ancient species. A tribe of Bigfoot now demands hybrid blood to ignite a war of extinction. Amar, once the sole survivor of what happened 25 years ago, returns not just with scars, but with a warning, one whispered by the forest itself, though no one ever listened. If you've ever known loss, if you've carried a pain that has no name, this story might give you something rare. Hope. Hope that a mother's love can defy fate. That blood doesn't define destiny, and that forgiveness, true, unconditional forgiveness, might stop annihilation in its tracks. Colin, the child once rejected, has returned, half human, half beast, standing at the center of an ancient ritual, prepared to offer himself in sacrifice. But his mother stepped into the blood circle and said, "No one uses my son for their war. If you skip this story, you'll miss something rare. A glimpse into the primal force of motherhood, into a life form capable of love, even one long seen as a monster." And now, this is her story. I woke up choking on the smell of smoke. It wasn't real. At least, not at first. It was that kind of scent that clings to you after a dream, like wet leaves or your mother's perfume long after she's gone. I sat up fast. My heart was thudding like something wanted out of my chest. The blanket was half off. My skin was damp. The room was cold, but not because the fire had gone out. I looked at the photo on the table. Colin, my boy. His face always made the cold quieter. But this time, the edges of the frame were blackened. Curling, as if burned from the inside, smoke rose gently, not from firewood, but from him. In the dream, something had taken him. A figure, towering, limping, half seen in the fog. It had no eyes, but it moved as if it knew him. Not hunting, not stealing, leading. And what terrified me most, Colin followed. No fear, no fight. Just followed, like he was going home. I couldn't breathe right for an hour after that. I live alone now, on the edge of Sitka, with the Tlingit women who still remember the old ways. I work with my hands. I carve. I sew. I mend nets. I keep quiet. People think I came here to hide. That's only half true. I came to remember. To stay close to the earth that shaped him. That claimed him. And then the package came. No return address. No stamps. Just a bundle wrapped in old seal hide, stitched with thread I hadn't seen in years. Thick, coarse, black like bear fur. My name on it, written in a handwriting I hadn't seen since I buried it 25 years ago. Inside, a single tuft of hair, coarse and gray. A burnt map, G's curled, soaked in something sticky and brown. And one line handwritten in the same script, blood remembers. I stared at that sentence until my eyes went dry. I touched the map. The burn traced back to one spot. The island. His island. The place I swore I'd never return to. But something deeper than fear stirred in my chest. I took the package to Island. She used to be a cultural historian. Tlingit elder, scholar, fierce protector of the old stories. Now she lives in a cedar shack, surrounded by feathers, skulls, and driftwood. Some say she's crazy. I say she's the last person alive who knows the difference between myth and memory. She didn't speak when I showed her the hair. Just ran her fingers over it, closed her eyes, and breathed through her nose like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. When she opened her eyes, they were wet. "He's not alone anymore," she said. I didn't ask who she meant. I already knew. Then she looked at me like I was a child again. "You think you're the only one searching? But there are others. Not all want him found. Some want him used. Some want him ended. A silence fell between us so heavy it made the wind outside sound louder. I didn't sleep that night. I packed instead. I sharpened the old skinning knife I kept hidden under the floorboards. I wrapped my mother's red scarf, the only bright thing I ever kept. I packed salt, flint, my journal, and I took the photo. Except now, his face was gone, like someone had taken a thumb and smudged him out. There was nothing left in the frame but forest. Fog. That tree we stood under 25 years ago. I don't know what I was more afraid of, that someone had erased him, or that he had erased himself. Before I left, I stood at the shoreline. The tide was low, rocks slick and shining under the moon. I could almost hear him in the wind, quiet, unsure, but waiting. Always waiting. I met Cass the next morning at the dock. He's young, barely 20, quiet. Name means fog in Tlingit, and it fits. He moves like mist over stone, light, but you feel him before you see him. He didn't ask questions. Just looked at my hands, the scars, the rope burns, the way I held the package. You're not going there to find something, he said. No, I answered. You're going to stop something. Yes. Helen came too. I didn't expect her to, but she showed up in full regalia. Raven feathers woven in her hair, her medicine pouch thumping against her chest with every step. We can't stop what's waking up, she said. But maybe we can keep it from remembering too much. That stayed with me. Keep it from remembering too much. Because that's the thing about blood. It remembers, even when you try to forget. Even when you build whole lives around forgetting. Even when your child is born of the thing that tore you apart. I told myself I was going back for him. But the truth is, I was going back for me. And as the boat pushed away from Sitka, cutting through the black glass of the Sound, I felt it, that hum. That old pulse beneath the waterline. The way the trees on Prince of Wales always lean towards something. Colin once told me. When he was 6 and we camped near Thorn Bay. The trees whisper when they see something they know. Back then I thought he was just being poetic. But now I know better. Because the trees aren't whispering anymore. They're calling. And smoke never rises alone. Something always burns beneath it. The rain didn't start as a storm. It started as breath, light, rhythmic. Like the forest itself was exhaling after holding something in too long. I remember standing there, pack on my back, boots sunk into soft moss, thinking it would pass. But it didn't. It just lingered, cold and damp and patient. We had just stepped off the main logging road and into the underbrush. Behind us, the ferry was already gone. In front of us, miles of wilderness. Just that burned map and a direction marked by something older than ink. Cass led. I followed. Island took the rear, humming to herself, eyes scanning not the path but the treetops. She said the spirits speak from above, that if we listened closely, we might hear when we were being watched. It was quieter than I remembered. Too quiet. The usual chorus of ravens and creaking trees was gone. The canopy above filtered out most of the light, turning everything a greenish gray, like the world was underwater. We hadn't gone more than 2 hours when Cass stopped. He bent down, brushing wet leaves aside with the back of his hand. At first I didn't see it. Then he lifted a fragment of glass. Camera lens, scratched, cracked, half buried in soil. Still warm. Island looked at me, then him. Someone was here. Not long ago. That was when we found the shoe. Just one hiking boot, high-end, laced halfway. No blood. No trail. Just abandoned in the middle of nothing. Cass didn't say a word. He pointed toward the ridge. We climbed. The hill was steep. Roots slick from rain, soil clinging to our fingers as we scrambled up. At the top, the trees opened into a clearing ringed with charred stumps. In the center, We saw it. The camera, still standing on its tripod, red light blinking barely. The lens fogged over, covered in pine sap and specks of something dark. I reached for it, but Aylin stopped me. "Don't touch," she said. "Not yet." She moved closer, hand out like she was calming a wounded animal. Then she pressed one button, and the screen blinked to life. The footage was grainy. Night vision. The timestamp was from the night before. It showed a man, young, bearded, wearing a headset, whispering to the camera like he was on the verge of laughing or crying or both. "We're out here," he said. "North tip of the island. Got something on the thermal last night. Big, upright, might be our guy. Going dark for now." The screen jumped. Wind noise, rustling leaves, then silence. The next shot showed the same man, standing by a tree, breathing heavily, pointing at something behind the lens. "It's bleeding," he whispered. From the roots, he turned the camera. That's when we saw it. A tree, tall, gnarled, split at the base. And from the crack, something was leaking. Thick, dark, like sap, but wrong. It pulsed, almost like it was alive. The man reached out, fingertips just grazing the edge. Then the screen cut to black. Aylin shut it off. She didn't speak. Just started praying under her breath. I could feel Koss tense beside me. He looked younger suddenly, like the island had just whispered something only he heard. We kept moving. The deeper we went, the more the forest changed. The trees weren't just old. They were wounded. Bark stripped in long curls, branches bent at impossible angles but not broken, like something had moved through them and left behind. A pattern. I saw the first blood tree near dusk. It wasn't bleeding like the one in the footage. It was worse. A tall spruce, dead but standing. From a dozen shallow cuts in its trunk, red sap oozed like veins had burst. Koss touched it, then looked at his fingers. "It's warm," he said. Aylin whispered something in Tlingit I didn't understand. Then she turned to me. "They're waking the land. That's what this is. The ancestors. They're not at peace. Something is stirring the bloodline. We set up camp just before nightfall. No fire. No fire. Fire. Just a tarp stretched between two trees and the sound of our breathing. Somewhere far off, an owl called. But even that sounded wrong." Aylin sat with her hands pressed into the dirt, eyes closed. Koss cleaned his knife without speaking. I held the package again, the hair, the map, that one line. Blood remembers. It kept echoing through me like a drum beat. Later that night, the air shifted. I woke to a sound I couldn't place. A mechanical whir, repeating, then cutting out. I followed it. 20 paces from camp, half buried in a pile of moss and branches, I found another camera, cracked, dead. But as I touched it, it buzzed. The screen lit up and played one final audio clip. Just static, then something garbled, and then I heard it. A voice. Small. Trembling. Familiar in a way that nearly knocked me to my knees. "Mom, don't come back." The words hung in the air, brittle and unfinished, like they'd traveled through too many layers of time to arrive whole. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook. The forest around me suddenly felt thick, watching. I turned back to camp, but nothing looked the same. The tarp was gone. The trees looked closer together. My own tracks disappeared. Only the blood tree stood as a marker, gleaming in the moonlight like it was made of wet glass. I stood there a long time. I wanted to run. Every part of me told me to run. But instead I walked back into the dark, whispering his name the way I used to when he had night terrors. Alan, because if the forest had him, I needed it to know I wasn't leaving without him, and I wasn't afraid of what bled from trees. I was afraid it would cause them to bleed. The wind changed that night. It had been following us for hours, whistling low through the canopy, brushing the tops of the cedar and spruce. But then it shifted. Sharper, quieter. Like it was listening more than moving. We were halfway up the ridge when I heard it for the first time. A voice. Not loud, not panicked, not human either. It was the kind of sound that seems like it doesn't belong to any throat, but still knows your name. Cas stopped mid-step, his breath caught. I saw his shoulders stiffen, then drop slowly. I whispered his name. He didn't answer. Just turned his head to the hill above us. That's when we saw it, a shape. Thin, tall, still. Standing just above the tree line, framed by the full moon behind it. It didn't move, didn't shift its weight or flinch, just stood there looking down at us. And then we heard it again. This time, it sounded younger, like a teenage boy. Just 3 words. Come back, Mom. I couldn't breathe. I didn't think. My legs moved before the rest of me caught up. I stumbled forward. Chest tight, arms heavy, vision swimming. Aylin's hand caught my arm and yanked me back. Her grip was like iron. Her eyes wide. That's not him, she whispered. Not yet. We camped below the rise. Aylin marked the ground with ash and cedar needles. Cas teed 3 bells to the branches above us. Lingit tradition, he said. Spirit bells. If something crossed through that space, we'd hear it first. I didn't sleep. I sat by the ashes of a fire we weren't allowed to light, watching the fog roll in slow and low like smoke from a forgotten war. I thought about that voice, that shape, that stillness, but mostly I thought about the night it all began. I've never told anyone the full truth about what happened in 1989, not even the people who begged me to, not even Colin, especially not him. But that night, sitting in the dark, I said it out loud. Maybe for myself, maybe for whatever was listening. I wasn't just attacked. I was taken, dragged from the truck, screaming, biting, thrashing, my wrists torn from fighting. My body numb by the time I was thrown into that cave. The cold was so sharp it made my lungs ache. I don't remember the face, only the heat of its breath, the smell of soil and fur and iron. And then, it was over. I don't know how long I laid there. I only know that I woke up sore, torn, dizzy, and bleeding. My clothes in tatters, my thighs bruised in hand-shaped imprints, my skin raw, my voice hoarse, and something else. Something deeper had changed. I didn't know I was pregnant until weeks later. At first, I thought it was Reed's, my husband. But it didn't make sense. Not with the timing, not with the nightmares, not with the way my body felt different, like something was rearranging me from the inside out. But I didn't hate the child. Not for 1 second. I hated the thing that made him, yes. But not him. Callan grew in silence. I spoke to him every day, told him stories, named every tree he'd be born under, promised him, no matter where he came from, I would never be the darkness that made him. He never was. That's what Island doesn't understand. That's what Cas can't feel. They think he's some prophecy or mistake, but he's my son. And that's why I followed the voice when it called again, just before dawn. Same words, same tone. Come back, Mom. And something else layered underneath it this time. Not sorrow, not fear. Loneliness. I stood, walked up the slope. Island didn't try to stop me. Cas stirred in his sleep, but didn't wake. I moved through fog so thick I could taste it. The air was heavy, like the sky was pressing down. Trees arched overhead like cathedral bones. At the top of the hill, the world changed. I crossed a line I didn't see but felt. The earth was warmer. The trees thicker. The air buzzing. And there it was. Mud laid in wide, deliberate lines, circles marked with bone and feathers. Smoke rising from deep pits that glowed like fire but smelled of ash and something sour. I knew this place. I'd read about it in Aylin's forbidden journals. The Tatch Deed, where two bloodlines, the gentle and the violent, unstrew borders with flame and clay. It was real. I stepped closer. My boots sank half an inch into the mud, but I didn't stop. Something in me, it pulled, not like instinct, like recognition, and then Aylin's voice cut through it all. Clear. Cold. He's not yours anymore. I turned. She stood at the edge of the divide, Cass behind her. His neck was bleeding. Thin red line curling just beneath his ear. He didn't seem to notice. I rushed to him, pulled his scarf aside. The wound wasn't deep, but it wasn't normal either. The mark looked like a spiral, but inside it, where the center should be, was a perfect shape. An eye, not drawn. Brandidi, what did this? I asked. Cass didn't speak, just looked up at the hill behind us. Aylin spoke instead. They marked him, not to kill, to watch, to warn. Then she looked at me. Her voice cracked, not from fear, but something worse. History. There's a spirit inside Colin, she said. Older than our stories. It doesn't belong in either world. I stared at the hilltop, at the path ahead, at the fog growing thicker by the second. I should felt fear, or doubt, or guilt, but all I felt was urgency. Because that voice, his voice, wasn't just calling anymore. It was pleading. And whatever stood on that ridge last night hadn't moved an inch. It was still waiting, watching, but not for me. For... something behind me. Something that had already crossed the line I just stepped over. The forest was thicker here. Heavier. The trees closed in until they felt more like walls than trunks, and the sky above thinned to a dull blue vein, barely pulsing through the branches. We had followed a trail of strange symbols, etched into rocks, painted onto bark, scratched into the soil. I didn't know what they meant, but they felt intentional. They didn't warn me away. They didn't guide me forward. They just pulled. Each one felt like it had been placed for HMA. Not for us. For EMA. At some point, I stopped hearing Kia's footsteps behind me. I stopped caring. Aylin had warned me that the land would try to separate us, not with cliffs or shadow. With our longing, I understood it now. The deeper I walked, the more I forgot about cold or time or hunger. It was like I was being led by memory, not movement. Somewhere behind my ribs, something fluttered. I don't know if it was fear or instinct or just blood remembering. Then I saw it. The lake. Still. Clear. Unbelievably clear. It sat nestled in a cradle of stones, surrounded by tall grass that didn't sway. Even in the breeze, the surface was so still, it felt wrong to breathe near it. Like sound itself would fracture the silence. I stepped to the edge, knees bent, hands to the earth. I leaned in, not far, just enough to see the reflection. It wasn't mine. At first, I thought the water was playing tricks on me, that the shape I saw was older, bigger. But then it blinked, and I didn't. It tilted its head, and I felt nothing move. Callan. Not the child I remembered. Not the boy with soft eyes and shoulders too small for his own name. This was a man. If man was even the word anymore. He was tall. Towering. His hair was longer. darker, thinned in places where coarse gray fur had grown thick across his chest and arms. His skin was pale beneath it, like moonlight on stone. But it was his eyes that broke me. They were mine, not completely, but enough. Not completely, but enough. The shape of them, the sadness in them. He didn't speak. Not at first. He just stepped out from the trees behind me, feet bare on wet moss, quiet as wind and fog. I turned to face him and didn't move. I turned to face him and didn't move. Every instinct I had, every maternal reflex, ached to touch him, to pull him close, to weep into the hollow of his shoulder. But I stayed still, because he was watching me like I was something he didn't trust yet. Then he reached out, palm open, fingers long, covered in hair but shaped like memory. I took his hand. The second I touched him, my thoughts weren't my own anymore. Or maybe they were. But they weren't words. They were rent shapes, feelings, pictures and smells and old sounds that weren't mine but were. Passed through flesh and bone and time until they bloomed between us like smoke in reverse. I saw the cave where he was born. I saw him curled under moss, shaking with cold, while something massive stood outside, humming low in a voice older than English. I saw hands, so many hands, not human, not cruel, but curious, gentle, covered in blood and warmth. I saw him grow beside firelight, learn without books, sing without voice. And then I saw what woke him. A sickness in the trees, a rift in the mud, blood that wasn't his, bleeding into the roots beneath him. I felt him yashe, not with pain, but with a hunger to understand where he came from. A yearning not to belong, but to shuji where he stood between two worlds. When the vision faded, we were still holding hands. I looked up at him and said his name out loud. Just once. He nodded, and finally he spoke. Not with lips, not with sound, but with something softer, sharper. Inside my head, you weren't meant to come. I didn't answer. He stepped back, just one slow stride. His chest rose with a deep inhale. I sent the package, he said. I needed you to know, not to follow. He turned his head like listening to something behind the trees. I asked what he meant, asked who was following me, asked what the blood meant, what the forest wanted, what he wanted. He only said one thing more. There are two tribes. His gaze shifted downward, his voice inside me thinned to a whisper. My mother's people and my father's both think they made me. But something older is waking now, and it wants both. I tried to reach for him again. But he was already walking backward, fading into fog, so thick it swallowed everything but sound. And the sound I heard last wasn't footsteps. It was heartbeat. Loud. Steady. Mine. Echoing against something ancient now awakened the bones beneath this place. It started with a sound I didn't understand. A low, tremoring moan that rolled out of the mountains and seemed to crawl under my skin before it ever reached my ears. We were walking again. Me, Aylin, Cass, through a gulch of broken rock and moss-choked roots. The lake was far behind us now, but something in the ground still pulsed like a distant heartbeat. Cass hadn't spoken since we left the boundary of the spiral stones. His wound had darkened, no longer bleeding, just glowing faintly in a way none of us wanted to acknowledge out loud. We didn't know what we were walking toward. We only knew what Colin had said. There were two tribes, and something older waking beneath both. The path narrowed where the trees leaned closer. Older, with branches thick like limbs, and covered in something that looked like frost but wasn't cold. It smelled like rot and sap and smoke. We followed an unnatural heat, the kind that rises from places that shouldn't be warm, like tombs or old machinery. That's when we found the mouth of the cave. It wasn't carved. It had grown that way. like the earth had split open out of grief. The air changed the second we crossed the threshold. Damp. Stagnant. Too quiet. I thought it was empty at first, until the sound came again. Not water. A cry. Thin. Choked. Like an infant's breath caught halfway between life and death. We froze. Aylin stepped forward without a word. Her body moved like it remembered something she hadn't lived yet. She lit a thin braid of cedar bark, and its smoke drew a slow blue line toward the cavern walls. The flame didn't flicker, not even once. We followed it. The tunnel twisted and descended. No markings, no animal scent, no signs of light. Only that sound, growing sharper. A baby crying, but wrong, mechanical and raw, as if echoing from a throat that hadn't learned how to cry yet. I felt it in my teeth before I heard it in my chest. The deeper we moved, the more the air began to hum. Not loud, but constant. We reached a chamber, large, circular, smooth like bone that had been polished by centuries of breath. And in the center, cradled in a nest of moss and ash, was something that looked like a cradle. But it wasn't made by hands. It was stone, split down in the middle. Inside, nothing. But the crying continued. Aylin stepped toward it. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Her hands shook. Cass leaned against the wall, face pale, eyes unfocused. That's when she spoke. Her voice didn't echo. It just sat in the air like mist. This is the place. I asked her what it meant. She didn't look at me, just whispered, "This is where they decide." Who? The ancestors. The ones that still walk beneath the skin of the island. When a child is born from blood that doesn't belong, they gather here, and they choose. Whether to keep what was made or undo it. Her hand touched the edge of the cradle. They did not undo him. I asked her how she knew. She turned, and for the first time, Aylin looked afraid. Because he still lives, Cass groaned behind us. I turned fast. His eyes were wide, his body stiff. His hands gripped the wall like it was the only thing keeping him from falling into himself. The spiral on his neck, glowing now, a soft red, like coal. I moved to him. He looked past me. "I see it," he said. "What?" "It's under us." He collapsed. Aylin and I caught him before he hit the ground. His skin was ice. He wasn't unconscious, but somewhere else. Speaking, not to us, to the men. I heard him whisper, "They want his blood. Not to kill, to cross." He gasped like surfacing from deep water. Aylin touched his face. He shivered, then vomited bile so dark it stained the floor. We left the cave. Fast. No one spoke until we reached the clearing again. Aylin said it without turning to me. She held the cedar braid again. It had turned black. There are forces in the old tribe. Not all of them care about peace. They see his bloodline as a bridge. Not a child. Not a man. A door. And they've waited long enough to open it. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Colin's face in the lake came back to me. The way he looked at me like he already knew I wouldn't be able to stop what was coming. But then I remembered something else. His words. "You weren't meant to come." Maybe I wasn't, but I was here now. And I had to choose. Let him become the bridge they needed. Or sever it before it opened. Aylin stood beside me, quiet. Cass lay resting against a fallen log, his chest rising slow but steady. I reached into my bag and pulled out the one thing I hadn't touched since Sitka. The photo, still burned at the edges. But now, something new. In the corner, barely visible. A faint imprint. A mark I didn't remember. It looked like my handwriting. But it wasn't mine. Just 5 words. "You remember." So do I. I looked up. The forest had gone still. Not empty. Waiting. We found the village just after dawn, half hidden behind a veil of morning fog so thick it looked painted onto the world. The air had gone quiet again. Too quiet. Not dead, just watching. Cass walked a few feet ahead of me, slower than usual, like the ground had changed under his boots and he wasn't sure what would hold. Aylin trailed behind, whispering to herself in Tlingit. I'd stopped asking what she was saying. I could feel it in my bones anyway. The village was nestled in a sunken clearing, surrounded by trees that bent inward, not from age, but as if something had pulled them toward the center. The cabins were crumbled but still standing, walls draped in moss, roofs half collapsed. Some looked recent, others ancient. What unsettled me most wasn't the silence or the emptiness or even the marks carved into the doorposts. It was the footprints. They were everywhere. Bare, large, human-shaped, but not human. Some too wide, some too long, and woven between them smaller ones, lighter, like something had walked there, and been followed, not chased, followed. Not chased, followed. Cass stopped near what had once been a communal fire ring. He crouched low, touched the ash. Still warm. He didn't speak. He just stood slowly, eyes scanning the tree line like he expected to see something waiting, but unwilling to come close. I stepped past him. One of the cabins still had its door intact. I pushed it open. Inside, everything was still. No dust, no rot, just waiting. On the table lay a woven basket, half filled with dried berries. They hadn't molded, they hadn't shriveled. They just were. Frozen in time. A child's carved toy sat on the floor, worn smooth from years of hands. It was shaped like a bear. But the proportions weren't right. The shoulders too broad. The feet too flat. The feet too flat. The eyes too wide. I knelt and picked it up. A wave hit me hard. Not a memory. Something older, deeper, not mine. Aylin stood at the doorway, her eyes locked on the totem poles that circled the far edge of the village. This place, she said, was not meant to be found. I turned to her. What was it? She walked in slowly, touched the frame of the door. A crossing, a hiding, a promise. Her voice dipped. A place where the bloodlines could rest, where no one had to choose between skin and bone. She looked at me then, really looked. Your son was born because of this place, not in it, but because of it. A consequence, a continuation. Outside, Cass had wandered toward one of the longhouses. I followed him without thinking, my feet moving faster than I could reason. As I stepped inside, the smell hit me first. Sweet decayed pine mixed with something sharp, almost metallic. Then I saw the carvings, covering every beam, every plank. Dozens of them. Layered stories, drawn spirals and shapes I didn't recognize. But I felt them. They were stories meant to be read. They were meant to be remembered in the blood. And at the far wall, painted in charcoal and ochre, was a single figure, tall, split down the center. One half cloaked in fur, crouched and wide, feet planted deep like roots. The other stood straight, human, bare thin, but its eyes were gone. Between them, a child curled into the earth, half swallowed by roots. Cass whispered behind me. They didn't want war. They wanted stillness. Aylin stepped in and nodded, quiet. This was a place of soul bonding. Not through flesh, through memory. Those who couldn't live in one world or the other came here, to forget the edges between them. She walked slowly toward the center of the longhouse. Her hands hovered over the dust-covered floor like she was reading it with her skin. They called it the gray time. She looked up at me. The season when neither tribe ruled, when silence was sacred, and when they allowed the in-between to breathe. I sat down, right there. No words. I was tired. Tired of choosing sides, of pretending I knew what Colin was or wasn't, of the fear that he'd become something I couldn't recognize. But now I understood. He didn't let you become anything. He was what they all had tried to forget. The in-between, not a mistake, a mirror. Island sat beside me, and for the first time, she wasn't a guide. She was just a woman who'd lived long enough to remember too much. She placed something in my hand. A pendant. Stone. Worn down to a spiral. But the center was cracked. Broken clean through. Someone has to stand where both lines end, she said. Someone has to stay. I held it tight. Outside, the wind shifted. Cass stood slowly. Face turned to the trees. "What is it?" I asked. His voice was soft. "A song. We listen. Not a melody. Not human. But rhythm. Like breath and footstep and heartbeat folded into one. It came from far beyond the ridge, and Kaz followed. I called out. He didn't turn. He walked through the trees like they opened for him. At the edge of the clearing, something shimmered. Not light. Memory. He disappeared. All that was left was the pendant he wore, spiral carved into dark wood, now split in two, resting in the grass. I didn't cry. Not then. I just stood there, holding the broken spiral in one hand and the carved bear in the other. And for the first time since Colin was born, I said it out loud. I don't want to fight anymore. I don't know who I was talking to, but something deep in the forest heard me. The moon that night bled like an open wound, low, wide, and red as rust. Everything under it felt slower, thicker, like we were moving through syrup instead of air. Island said nothing as we reached the ridge. Her hands were cold, even though the night felt warm. Too warm. I remember hearing something distant, drumming maybe, or just the sound of wind threading its way through dead trees. But it came in patterns, not gusts, like it had a rhythm, a purpose. Cass was still gone, and I was starting to believe he might not have ever existed at all. We stepped into the clearing, and I felt it before I saw it, like walking into a cathedral already mid-prayer. There, in the center, under that awful red moonlight, they were waiting. Bigfoot. Not the shadow I'd run from in my past, not the silent watcher behind trees. These were bodies, tall, massive, kneeling in a half circle, their heads bowed towards something wrapped in hide at the center of the clearing. The way they moved, slow, deliberate, reverent, reminded me of funerals back home. Except this didn't feel like mourning. This felt like offering. Aylin inhaled sharply beside me, her breath catching like it didn't want to leave her chest. I stepped forward before she could stop me. The hide bundle was small, not random, placed carefully in the center of their gathering. I crouched low, fingers trembling as I reached for it. I half expected something to growl or lunge or disappear the moment I touched it. But nothing did. The clearing remained silent. Still, the hide was smooth, worn with time. I unwrapped it slowly. Inside was something I hadn't seen in over 2 decades. My journal. The one I'd lost 25 years ago, the year after Callan was born. The one I'd hidden in a rusted toolbox behind our cabin, full of entries I'd written in the dark when he cried and I couldn't sleep. The one I thought the rain had eaten or the wind had scattered. It was here, intact, returned. I opened the cover and found my own handwriting, skipping raw. But there, and under the first entry, beneath the words, "He's quiet tonight," was a new sentence I never wrote. "So am I." I froze. Aylin stepped closer now, just behind my shoulder. "They've read it," she whispered. "They remember you." I looked up at them. The kneeling figures, the bent heads, their breath rising like smoke in the moonlight. One of them lifted his face. I recognized that shape. Colin, standing in the center of it all, between 2 larger figures, one with open palms stretched toward him, one with a stone clenched tight in a fist. Neither moved. He looked at me, and I knew this wasn't a moment I could interrupt with words, but I did anyway. I walked toward him. My knees shook, but I kept moving. Aylin called after me once, just once. But her voice didn't carry. It didn't belong to this place. I reached him. His eyes weren't wild like before. They weren't afraid either. He looked resolved, but tired. So tired, I grabbed his hand. It was warm. "Your blood doesn't belong to either tribe," I said, my voice barely making it past the weight in my chest. "It's yours, not theirs." He didn't answer me, but I felt something stir in the crowd. The figure to his right, the one with the open palms, stepped back. The other one, the one with the stone, raised it. I turned toward him. And then something broke the air. A sound so sharp it carved the night open. Not a scream, not a growl. A breath that turned into a shriek, stretched until it folded into something like singing. Every creature in the clearing froze, then turned. She stepped forward from the tree line, small, frail, bent with age. Her skin was gray, her hair thin and white, braided with bark and bone. She wore no clothes, only layers of ash and earth. Her feet didn't quite touch the ground. I had never seen her before, but I knew her. Somehow, I knew her. She walked between us, between Colin and me, between the stone and the silence. And she raised one trembling hand. First, she touched my shoulder. Her fingers burned. Not like fire, like memory. Then she turned to Colin and touched his chest. The song stopped. No one moved. No one breathed. Then, without warning, every single figure in that clearing vanished into the mist. Gone. No sound, no flash, just silence, except Colin. Still standing there, still holding my hand, still mine. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. Because I knew now. They had offered something to him, and he had refused. Not with words. With presence. With choice. And for the first time, maybe ever, they listened. Aylin stepped toward us slowly. She looked drained, pale. Her eyes met mine, and I saw it in her. She didn't know what came next, and neither did I. But for now, under that bleeding sky, we stood in the space where war had been promised, and didn't come. Because he chose not to be the gate. He chose to be a wall. And when I looked down at the journal in my hand, a page flipped on its own. The ink was fresh, and the sentence was short. "Not all blood obeys." I exhaled, and for the first time in years, the air felt clean. I live quieter now, not just in the way I speak or move, but in how the world presses against me. It's softer, distant, like whatever used to chase my thoughts has finally grown tired. The cabin's still here. Same one I settled into all those years ago after I came back. It leans a little more to the left now. The roof complains louder during winter, but it holds. And I stay. I never told anyone what happened on that island. Not really. Not the full truth. Not the night. The sky bled red. Or the way the trees held their breath. Or how the air cracked like glass just before it all stopped. Not how he stood between them. Not how everything changed when he didn't choose a side. People don't ask much anymore, and I don't offer. But things still arrive. Every month. No name on the envelope. No return address. Just a folded piece of thick paper, slipped through the slit in my front door like a secret. On it, always a drawing, sometimes rough, sometimes detailed, sometimes just a mark that only makes sense to me. I keep them in a drawer by the window, one for every month since that night. Somewhere between the 11th and the 12th, I stopped trying to guess how he finds me. And maybe that's the point. Island passed last spring. Her heart gave out during the thaw. The ice hadn't fully melted yet, and the ravens were still nesting. I found her sitting by the river, eyes open, hands folded in her lap like she'd just paused between breaths. She looked content, like she knew something had come full circle. Inside her medicine pouch, tucked between dried cedar and seal teeth, was a small ring of polished stone. I held it for hours before I realized what was inside. A roll of undeveloped film. Not from her time. From mine. I brought it to the last photo lab in Sitka. The man behind the counter didn't ask questions. Just nodded, disappeared into the back, and came out 3 days later with a single print. It showed 2 figures standing before a massive cedar. The woman, me, had her arm raised, palm open. The figure beside her was taller, broad-shouldered, hair long, eyes dark, half of his face in shadow, the other half covered in fine gray fur. I looked younger in the photo, and older. He looked like someone who had just learned how to stand still. It sits on my mantel now, framed, but not labeled. Most people who come in think it's just a strange old photograph, some kind of composite or hoax. I'll let them think what they want. The truth belongs to fewer people than you'd think. This morning was colder than usual. The kind of cold that seeps into the wood no matter how hard the fire burns. I opened the front door just as the sun cracked the horizon. The frost hadn't melted from the grass. The trees beyond the edge of the property still wore their veil of mist. And then I saw him. Not a man, not quite a child. A boy, maybe 15, maybe 20. Hard to tell. Tall, lanky, barefoot. He stood at the edge of the woods, just inside the light. Half of his face was human. The other, familiar. Not monstrous. Just different. Fur ran down the side of his jaw. His ear, slightly pointed, twitched once, but his eyes were his, my son's eyes. I stepped onto the porch. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink. He just looked at me like he was waiting for something he wasn't sure I could still give, and I did the only thing that felt true. I smiled. Soft. Warm. Certain. You don't need to explain, I said. I remember. His shoulders lowered just a little. He gave the faintest nod, then turned and disappeared into the fog again. I didn't call after him. I didn't cry. I went back inside, made tea, and sat with the fire for a while. The house was still, but not empty. On the table by the window, there was a single sheet of paper, new. The ink still drying. Just one sentence, scribbled in handwriting that looked like mine once did, before the world grew too heavy. Some things don't return. They don't forget, either. I folded it gently, placed it with the others, and sat in the quiet, waiting, but not searching. Because sometimes love doesn't come with answers. It just comes back. In pieces. In silence. In fog. And if you're lucky, you're there when it does. Sometimes. The stories that stay with us the longest aren't the ones with clear answers. They're the ones that whisper, not shout. That leaves space between the lines and ask us to sit in that silence a little longer. Stories that don't beg to be understood, but to be felt. Because not everything that disappears is lost. And not everything that stays is meant to be held forever. There are wounds that never truly close, and questions that grow quieter instead of finding resolution. And in that quiet, there's room for something rare. Acceptance. The understanding that we may never know the full truth of what we saw, or why it mattered. Only that JIT did. That it shaped us, marked us, made us softer in the places we once hardened. In a world that moves faster than memory, it takes courage to slow down. To listen to what isn't said, To stand at the threshold of what we can't explain and choose compassion over fear. Maybe that's where healing begins, not in the certainty of facts, but in the grace of not needing them. Because sometimes, what bridges us isn't blood, or belief, or even language. It's presence. A hand that doesn't pull, but rests beside ours. A glance that says, "E-she, you," even when the world looks away. And in those rare moments when the lines between us blur, when the forest leans in, when the silence hums with memory, something ancient and kind passes through us. We may not have the words for it, but we know. Deep down, we know. Thank you for walking with this story, through the shadows, the echoes, the mist. If it moved something in you, even a little, let it stay. Let it settle in the quiet corners. Let it remind you that mystery isn't always a threat. Sometimes it's an invitation. If you felt connected to this journey, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What lingered? What haunted? What healed? And if you'd like to travel deeper into stories like this, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. There's more to come. Maybe not answers, but meaning. And sometimes, that's more than enough.